Hey, what's going on? How you doing today? I am David Long. I am just coming today to share with you some clips from my video that I recently made about addressing integral integrity with Steve McIntosh. It's kind of a long video, so I decided to break it into some parts, into some clips, and share it with you. If you enjoy this, feel free to check out the full-length version right here. Enjoy.
Warning, the following video is using integral language and distinctions. I will try to explain as I go, but to some extent it is assuming that you are integrally informed or have some knowledge of integral theory already. If you do not, you can find intro material on my I Am David Long YouTube page.
Here's another major problem. Only mention the idea of transrationality once, and it's not even qualified.
Look for spirit in ways that can be, transrational or pre-rational in some cases.
Alright, so let's talk real quick about what this word transrational is and is not referring to, because it seems like there's a lot of confusion around this topic. And basically, what a lot of the confusion is that people hear that word transrational and they think they know what it means based on other experiences that they've had and other knowledge they have about other traditions that they might be involved in. For example, some people hear that word transrational, like a transrational understanding, and they think it means psychic ability, like I know beyond rationality, I just have a transrational experience. Transrational knowing in that kind of way is not what the word transrational is talking about. Another confusion that sometimes happens is that people who are into Buddhism and state training or meditation, they hear the word transrational and they think that it relates to what they're doing in some of their meditative practices where they quiet the mind or they quiet the rational parts of the mind or the talking parts of the mind, and they have a transrational experience. And again, that's not what we're talking about. That's states of consciousness. Now, there is a confusion around this because horizontal development and peak experiences probably do correlate to a transrational stage of development. From a transrational perspective, one can have transpersonal experiences. But there's a lot of problems of translation because a lot of people can hear this kind of talk and think about it from the magical, mythical perspective still. So this is a point of confusion. But properly, what transrational is referring to is stages of development. So the rational stage of development. There are stages before that, magical and mythical stages, which are pre-rational. You have pre-rational interpretations of something that are magical and mythical. And then you have rational interpretations of something. Then you have transrational or post-formal. So there's another kind of distinction too that's similar. It's like conventional. You have your rational, modern, and your traditional stages, which are the more conventional stages. You have pre-conventional, impulsive egoics, and you have post-conventional or post-formal, postmodernist, integralists, so on. Basically, what we're talking about in terms of a transrational translation is a metaphorical translation. Now, a metaphor is not simply literal. It's not simply true or false. There's something deeper going on beyond what the symbols are referencing. And so this is the mind's ability to take into account more factors and to be able to see deeper and deeper truths. So we're talking about the beginning of becoming more and more ego construct aware, realizing the relative nature of language, and to some extent deconstructing the way that all symbols hide and reveal aspects of the truth, the different multiple entendres of possible interpretation. Not just simply, is this literally true or is this literally false? But now you can say, how is this true? How does this relate to my experience? What is this symbol saying in a deep way about what it is to be alive? And a metaphor makes sense. This kind of poetry that we're talking about, the interpretations of them do make sense. They are pointing to something that is there. It's not bullshit, and it's also not supernatural. It doesn't break the rules of rationality, the way that we understand the universe works. It's nothing magical or mythical. That's my point. The pre-rational stages tend to take myth literally. The rational stages tend to say that the myth is not literally true and they know that it's not fact, but they're both arguing whether it's true or not. And at the transrational stage, they will transcend and include both. They have found the synthesis, so they know that scientifically, rationally, it's not true, but poetically, metaphorically, in terms of the meaning that was supposed to be read into it, it is true. Take, for example, the tortoise and the hare. You don't ask, is the story true or not? If you think it's really about a tortoise and a hare, you've missed the point. It's about hard work and dedication, not a tortoise and a hare in a race or any of that. So that's a transrational, transliteral, post-formal approach to symbolism. And I want to make this distinction. It's not the experience itself that is pre-rational, rational, or transrational. It's the interpretation of the experience, the translation of the experience. Think back to the Wilber-Combs matrix that we showed earlier. For example, you can have an experience when you're young, and let's say you interpret that experience in a very traditional, magical, mythical way. Then you get a little bit older and you think back to that experience after maturing a little bit and kind of deconstructing your religion. You might interpret that same experience in a rational way. Then, let's say you get a little bit older, a little bit more mature still, you might think back on that same experience in a more transrational, poetic kind of way, where you can read in deeper meaning about how it affected your life. Same experience, one experience, but you can view that experience from all three different stages of development as you grow. So it's the translations that are pre-rational, rational, or transrational, not the experiences themselves. I've also made another video about what a transrational or post-formal perspective would look like, and I can't help but share a clip from it here now.
In the history of philosophy and poetry and art, we always find the interchange of two personality types, which I call Prickles and Goo. The prickly people are advocates of intellectual porcupinism. They want a rigor. They want precise statistics. And they have a certain clipped attitude in their voices, and you know this very well in academic circles, where there are people who are always edgy like that. And they accuse other people of being disgustingly vague and miasmic and mystical. But the vague, miasmic, and mystical people accuse the prickly people of being mere skeletons with no flesh on their bones. And they say to you, you just rattle. You're not really a human being. You know the words, but you don't know the music. But this natural universe is neither Prickles nor Goo exclusively. It's gooey Prickles and prickly Goo. And, you see, it all depends on your level of magnification. If you've got your magnification on something so that the focus is clear, you've got a prickly point of view. You've got structure, shape, clearly outlined, sharply defined. You look out of focus, it's going to go bleh, and you've got Goo. But we're always playing with the two.
Imagine you're in a movie theater, and you're watching Star Wars, let's say, with Prickles and Goo. So, Goo over here says something like, wow, this movie's amazing. I want to be a Jedi and use the Force. Prickles overhears this, and he is not happy. He says, you're stupid. You can't be a Jedi. That's dumb. This is just a movie. That's computer animation and green screens, actors and actresses playing scenes. It's not real at all. Luckily, there was no one in the theater, so I was able to say, well, hold on a minute now, there, Prickles and Goo. George Lucas, he put his real thoughts and ideas into this movie. Like, this is about the human drama
there's truth to be had in this. Okay, sure, it's green screens and computer graphics, but also, maybe there is something to this metaphor of tapping into the one life force or the one energy of the cosmos that connects us all. Maybe metaphorically you could be a Jedi. And yeah, it's just a movie. This gets me into what we call the pre-trans fallacy. There are two versions of the pre-trans fallacy. The first version is what Prickles over here tries to do to Goo, where he says, "You're just childish, you're just stupid." So that's one version of the fallacy, is to reduce anything that's non-rational to childish bullshit, like maybe Freud or Richard Dawkins or people like this might do. On the other hand, the second version of this kind of fallacy is a lot of these new agey people thinking that all of these symbols, all of this poetry is all God, even though it's all coming from a whole bunch of different cultures. It's totally embedded in old school traditions and antiquated cosmologies, and it's not relevant to the time we live in, and these different symbols are not actually compatible with each other. So those are your two versions. You have scientists who are totally literal, and you have religious people who are crazy and totally literal. So the difference between pre and trans is pre-rational translations are literal, magic and mythic. Trans-rational translations are metaphorical, even to the point of including what Nietzsche is talking about how we're using a bunch of metaphors to communicate. I'm going to go ahead and take this as an opportunity to read you one of my favorite Nietzsche quotes. He says, "What then is truth? A mobile army of metaphors, metonyms, and anthropomorphisms. In short, a sum of human relations which have been enhanced, transposed, and embellished poetically and rhetorically, and which after long use seem firm, canonical, and obligatory to a people. Truths are illusions about which one has forgotten that is what they are. Metaphors which are worn out and without sensuous power. Coins which have lost their picture and now matter only as metal, no longer as coins. We still do not know where the urge for truth comes from, for as of yet we have heard only of the obligation imposed by society that it should exist. To be truthful means using the customary metaphors. In moral terms, the obligation to lie according to fixed convention, to lie herd-like in a style obligatory for all." Friedrich Nietzsche. Think about what he's saying here. He's making a truth claim about truth claims. He's saying that we use a vast mobile army of metaphors, metonyms, and anthropomorphisms, a sum of human relations which have been enhanced, transposed, and embellished poetically. He's basically saying that we have all of these symbols that we trade around. And he said, after long use, they seem firm and canonical and obligatory to a people, that they're illusions. And he compares them to these coins which have lost their picture and now matter only as metal. He's saying that we've been trading around these symbols so much that we forget that they're printed and man-made, and we just think that they're this metal that's worth something. And we forget that it's a made-up game that we're playing. We still do not know where the urge for truth comes from, for as yet we have heard only of the obligation imposed by society that it should exist. So we're not exactly sure why we have to talk about things in this particular way, but it's always been the case, I guess, because we've been indoctrinated into these ways, and we just take it for granted. So being truthful means using the customary metaphors in moral terms, because he's saying that the value is relative, it's agreed upon, so it's a moral should, it's a relative agreement. The obligation to lie, because we know that it's not the case, but we're going to play this game together according to fixed convention, and that we're all pushed into these ways of talking about things. That's a really interesting way of understanding truth. And when you do understand the relative nature of truth, this is the kind of truth claim that you'll probably be making about the way that most people think about truth. So this is the beginning of some kind of a post-formal or trans-rational kind of perspective where you can put the poetry in context. This is that middle position between the Eastern and Western perspectives where we can both understand the context of the symbol, understand the limits of it, understand the strengths of it, but also realize it's just a symbol, it's just poetry, and in a sense, it's illusory. So in that way, it is transcending and including these different types of truth, probably in the most healthy and inclusive way.
So not just understanding the poetic value of religious symbols, but the poetic value of all symbols. You have pre-conventional ideas and post-conventional ideas. You know, like a baby doesn't understand language, and so it gets indoctrinated into all of these terms, and it takes them literally for granted. Whereas someone who has a post-formal understanding, like I'm talking about, like what Nietzsche had, they might use some of these same terms that, like we're talking, like he's using to deconstruct or reveal the nature of truth, but the translation is different. The baby takes the symbols as literally true. The rational mind can see the unfounded claims in the literal reading, and a transrational reading is metaphorical, seeing deeper truths beyond the symbol.
And a lot of this, I think, relates to what is called vision logic. There's early vision logic, which relates to green. There's mid-vision logic, which is early integral stages. And then there's late-stage vision logic, which is your more teal, integrally informed second-tier stage. So early vision logic is like a lot of this poetry and this kind of a deeper read that happens within metaphor starting to come online. But there's still some pre-trans confusion, which is you can see the poetic deep beauty in mythology and different symbols and different traditions and what it's getting at and how it makes you feel, but you could still take some of the things that are associated with it, related to it literally, and get into some kind of confusion where you haven't really been able to figure out what makes it true or not yet. That's that second pre-trans fallacy that we mentioned earlier, pre-trans fallacy number 2, where green tries to elevate things that are pre-rational as if they're trans-rational. And to some extent, they probably need to better integrate the rational or scientific perspective on those matters. Much the same way that's happening in this case with Steve. Then at the integral stage is where you're going to start to learn to make some of these distinctions. And it's like a more early kind of stage where you can actually make this transrational distinction. You can say, well, there's a difference between a metaphoric, symbolic use of that symbol and a literal, dogmatic use of that symbol. And then the integrally informed stage, this more spiral wizard, spiral technician, skillful practitioner in the world, is not just able to make these distinctions, but move around the world and navigate symbolically, skillfully, not just crafting a good symbol set and translation for themselves, but helping others where they're at. As integralists, we don't have a belief system. What we have are tools of discernment and communication. We have the cup and we have the sword. We have poetry. We have this feminine, flowing, nourishing kind of language that's deep and profound. We have the masculine, flaming sword that separates the passing from the eternal, that separates the truth from the bullshit, that cuts through. These are our two tools of discernment and communication. You have rationality, logic, scientific method, and you have poetry, beauty, things that resonate with people. So this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because from a transrational perspective, we realize the relative nature of language. We realize that even the sword is a type of poetry. Even when we speak poetically, the poetry can be qualified. The metaphor is talking about something. So there's an interchange here between these two, but we need to be able to hold them both in view. So for example, if you're talking about these symbols of transcendence and whatever, like I can understand that in a way that is poetically beautiful because I can figure out a way that your symbols might be true. Now, if that's not how you mean it, if you think that it's literally true, I can also pull out my sword and get in there and make some distinctions. Either way, whether we're speaking poetically or we're speaking rationally, we need to be able to qualify what we're saying, to qualify our poetry.
Joseph Campbell, probably the recent era's greatest mythologer and interpretive mythology, and somebody I certainly cut my teeth on. I was a great admirer of his and a really extraordinary work that he did. He used to very, very vehemently, actually, say that there's really sort of two types of mythology, or mythology forms two different functions. He wouldn't use the terms pre-rational and trans-rational, but the way we're talking about them is the way he would talk about these two functions of mythology. And the first function is when mythology is taken to be concretely real. But what some people do, particularly educated, intelligent people like us that are trying to get some meaning in our lives, we can tend to take myths as deeply symbolic of something else. Campbell knew this, as if the capacity to form a cognition that says it's as if this is the case, or it would be, it's transrational. It can represent a deeper self, a higher self. It can represent oneness with all of reality. The Christ mythos itself is made to order for all sorts of interpretations. So that's a very, very distinguishing way to tell the difference between pre-rational myths that are taken to be concretely, literally true, and trans-rational myths that may represent some very high transpersonal dimensions. So as long as we take both of those into account, then we have the sort of more integral overview. And the problem, again, with the pre-trans fallacy is that people like Freud take every trans-rational, as if higher mythology and reduce it to two-year-old infantile nonsense. And on the other hand, way too many people take a lot of the pre-rational stuff and elevate it to trans-rational glory it just doesn't have.
From the outside, how do you know if this person's operating at a pre-rational or trans-rational level? Would it be if they were able to say, I'm going to act as if?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you ask them exactly what is it that you're doing. If they're making an empirical claim, check it empirically. On the other hand, it can be a very high kind of metaphoric, an as-if interpretive tool or Rorschach block.
So these stories of mythology are simply trying to express a truth that can't be grasped any other way.
It's the edge, the interface between what can be known and what is never to be discovered, because it is a mystery transcendent of all human research. The source of life. What is it? No one knows. Carl Jung's idea, which he calls the archetypes of the collective unconscious.
What do you mean by archetype?
They are expressions of the structure of the human psyche. All the gods, all the heavens, all the worlds are within us. They are magnified dreams. One can say that the images of myth are reflections of spiritual and depth potentialities of every one of us. From contemplating those, we evoke those powers in our own lives. And to see life as a poem and yourself participating in a poem is what the myth does for you. Every mythology, every religion is true in this sense. It is true as metaphorical of the human and cosmic mystery. But when it gets stuck to the metaphor, then you're in trouble.
The metaphor being?
Well, Jesus ascended to heaven. The story is he ascended bodily to heaven. So this is metaphorical of something. You don't have to throw it away. All you have to find is what it's saying.
What do you think it is saying?
What it's saying is he didn't go out there, he went in here, which is where you must go too, and ascend to heaven through the inward space to that source from which you and all life came. That's the sense of that.
But aren't you undermining one of the great cardinal doctrines of the traditional classic Christian faith, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus?
That would be what I would call the mistaken reading of the symbol. That's reading it in terms of prose instead of in terms of poetry. That's reading a metaphor in terms of the denotation instead of in terms of the connotation. You understand that? It's a purely literary problem. Now, we want to think about God. God is a thought. God is a name. God is an idea. But its reference is to something that transcends all thinking. The ultimate mystery of being is beyond all categories of thought. The best things can't be told because they transcend thought. The second best are misunderstood because those are the thoughts that are supposed to refer to that which can't be thought about, and one gets stuck with the thoughts. The third best are what we talk about, you see. And a myth is that field of reference, metaphors referring to what is absolutely transcendent. I think it's important to live life with a knowledge of its mystery and of your own mystery. He who thinks he knows doesn't know. He who knows that he doesn't know, knows. The ultimate unqualified mystery is beyond human experience. It becomes inflected. As they say, there is a condescension on the part of the infinite to the mind of man, and that is what looks like God.
So whatever it is we experience, we have to express in language that is just not up to the occasion.
That's it.
It's
That's what poetry's for. Poetry is a language that has to be penetrated. It doesn't shut you off. It opens. It's the rhythm, the precise choice of words that will have implications and suggestions that go past the word is what has to happen. And then you get what Joyce calls the radiance, the epiphany. The epiphany is the showing through of the essence beyond names and forms. No tongue has soiled it. No word has reached it. Words are always qualifications and limitations. Our way of thinking in the West largely is that God is the source of the energy. The way in most Oriental thinking, and I think in most what we call primitive thinking also, is that God is a manifestation of the energy, not its source. For instance, when I was a little boy and was being brought up a Roman Catholic, I was told I had a guardian angel on my right side and a tempting devil on my left. When it came to making a decision of what I would do, the decision would depend on which one had most influence on me. And I must say that in my boyhood, and I think also in the people who were teaching me, they actually concretized those thoughts. That angel is a fact, and the devil is a fact, you see. Otherwise, one thinks of them as metaphors for the energies that are afflicting and guiding you. This is why clowns are good in religions, because they show that the image is not a fact, but it's a reflex of some kind, and yet they are the creator God at the same time. This makes the point, I am not the ultimate image, I am transparent to something through me, through my funny form, and mocking it, and you really get the sense, which if I had been a big sober presence, you get stuck with the image. But when you think everything's just that way, it comes in, it all blows, and you get the becoming thing again. Religion is a defense against a religious experience. It has reduced the whole thing to concepts and ideas, and having the concept and idea short circuits the transcendent experience, the experience of deep mystery is what one has to regard as the ultimate religious experience. The image of God becomes the final obstruction. Your God is your ultimate barrier. And that's why it's a peak experience to break past all that every now and then, to realize, I think so.
There's also an important distinction to be made between how we speak on the inside of an integral worldview and how we speak on the outside to other people in terms of skillful means and whatnot. So on the inside, within our we space, we want to be able to speak all kinds of poetry to each other. We want to be able to speak about feeling called to do the will of God in time, and we want to be able to speak about Buddha nature or death to self or any of these kinds of poetic religious symbolism in a way where we all know what we're talking about. Those are valid ways of talking about our experience. It's poetically valid. Not only is it poetically valid, we are narrative-driven creatures. That's what we do. We tell stories. And so some of the deepest, most profound things that we can talk about relates back to mythology. And so we don't want to throw out mythology. We want to understand it in context and be able to use it skillfully. But we also want to be able to qualify within our group that we're speaking poetically to each other and be able to back up the poetry if someone asks about it. Being able to make this kind of distinction is a key feature of being integrally informed. And then skillful means on the outside looks like being multilingual and being able to translate and speak to a bunch of different people where they're at. Christians, Buddhists, and not just Christians and Buddhists, but traditional Christians and Buddhists, modern rational Christians and Buddhists, green, pluralistic, postmodern Christians and Buddhists, and be able to speak their language at the different stages, to be able to speak to a rational person in their own terminology, to be able to speak to a Christian at their stage of development in their own terminology. We need to be able to understand this poetry to help people with healthy translation, and that's why Michael Dowd is such a great example of this. So let's look at what someone like a Michael Dowd says. And you can see how he gives such a good demonstration of transrationality, how to understand these ideas poetically and metaphorically, and he can qualify it as such, and his ability to use this in a way where he can translate to Christians in the world and get them to be more concerned with climate change and to take more of the quadrants into consideration to have a more healthy translation where they're at. We really need integralists out there who are doing this kind of work. So the cup, the sword, how to be integral on the inside, how to be integral on the outside. These are things I think Michael Dowd demonstrates well, and important distinctions that I'm trying to make. So here's a clip I made from a recent interview from Buddha at the Gas Pump, where Michael Dowd is explaining his perspective. And I invite you to watch the full interview right here.
Now, I personally am rather passionate about what I call the path of factual faith or sacred realism. I'm a religious naturalist. I have no supernatural or otherworldly beliefs. We are in the largest transformation of religious sensibility in perhaps human history, a second axial age. I call it the evidential reformation, where all the religions of the world are coming to realize that there is no future for humanity or for their faith if we don't come into right relationship to reality. I sometimes say reality is my God, evidence is my scripture, and ecology is my theology. And said another way, any understanding of God that doesn't include what we today mean by the word reality isn't God. reality is Lord. That's not a belief, that's a fact. That is, everything submits to and is accountable to what today we would call reality. What's real, whether you believe in it or not. And whether you call that God or the goddess or the universe or cosmos or, whatever, Buddha nature, we are all part of that, what I call divine reality. We have to learn from nature as if nature is the voice of God, and if nature's laws are God's laws, and we either need to abide by those laws or we suffer the consequences. We will create the hell for ourselves and our children. And any understanding of scripture that doesn't include evidence is not God's word. Evidence is the main way reality is revealing truth to us today. Not only the evidence of our own experience, but also scientific, historic, and cross-cultural evidence. So that can't be, that needs to be lifted up at the realm of divine revelation or God's word or scripture. But one of the things that God, reality, has been revealing through evidence, through evolutionary psychology and evolutionary brain science, among other places, is that we have self-deceptive instincts. And that's why we need the collective. Scientists are just as prone to self-deception as anybody else, but the community of scientists, where there's motivation, where there's incentive to prove each other wrong, is usually a good thing in the long run in terms of helping our theories and our understandings of reality come into a closer alignment with the way reality really is. We now know, again, we don't believe this, we know this, that our brains are inherently relational. We can't not relate. Our brains are instinctually programmed to relate, and we typically relate through human categories. So we throughout human history, we've treated the river or the soil or the oceans or whatever in a personified way, and all gods and goddesses are personifications, not persons. If I think of God, or any god or goddess throughout human history, as a separate non-material entity floating around somewhere, okay, then I'm going to miss the power of the personification. I'm going to miss the inescapable reality. Like I say, Helios is inescapably real. Poseidon is inescapably real. Gaia is inescapably real. You don't have to personify those realities, but the realities that they point to are inescapably real. And that's why I love the fact that Hollywood has just gotten with the program in a major way. Anybody watching or listening to this, just put natureisspeaking.com. And there's these videos that have now been done. Julia Roberts, for example, speaks as Mother Nature.
I've been here for over 4.5 billion years. 22,500 times longer than you. I don't really need people, but people need me.
She doesn't speak about nature. She's nature giving voice. Harrison Ford speaks as the oceans.
I am the ocean. I'm water. I'm most of this planet. I shaped it. Every stream, every cloud, and every raindrop, it all comes back to me.
You could say that's the voice of Poseidon today. And I mean, these are kick butt. I mean, some of these videos have had millions of views. They've gone viral because they tap into the power of personification. And so for me, God is a personification of reality. I put it this way: God is reality with a personality, not a person outside reality. So for me, God is inescapably, undeniably real, or the goddess, whatever you want to call it. But for us, the word God is like a name, a proper name, a sacred name for reality as a whole. And the only way of salvation, again, using mythic language, but the only way of salvation is to come back into right relationship to reality. And that's the path of integrity. So for me, Christ is not a supernatural person floating around somewhere. Christ is the incarnation or embodiment or personification, a personification of integrity. You may think there's some path to right relationship to reality that bysteps integrity. You're deceived. There's no way. And so Satan is not some disembodied spook. Satan is a personification of everything that would lead us or could lead us to be out of right relationship to reality, everything that would lead us to be anti-future, personified. So from that vantage point, Satan and Christ are inescapably real. They're not supernatural beings. They're personifications of that which would have us destroy the future, or that which would have us save or help or be a blessing to the future. Our metaphors matter. The analogies and metaphors that we use for reality matter. They shape our attention and put our consciousness in a certain track that can be either life-giving and pro-future or life-damaging and anti-future. And our concepts of God can do the same thing. In fact, I think that it's not secular people are attacking some of the new atheists and secular folk are often attacking religion, saying religion's the problem because they even have a God concept. Well, I suggest that's missing the point too. The word God can either be thought of as pointing to some supernatural entity who lives off the planet and outside the universe, who blesses some and smites others. That's a trivial, impotent, inconsequential God. Or the word God can be understood from a science-based way. The one science-based way of understanding of God is that all God talk, all gods and goddesses are personifications, that is, giving human characteristics to something that's inescapably real. I mean, Poseidon wasn't the god of the oceans. Poseidon wasn't the spirit of the oceans. Poseidon was a personification of the incomprehensibly powerful and capricious seas. Gaia was a personification of Earth, not the goddess of the Earth or not the spirit of the Earth. Helios was not the god of the sun, but a personification of this inescapably real reality that gives us life. So the word God, if the word God is not personifying inescapable reality, then it's a trivial God that actually, if we think that we can worship God and trash the environment or treat others in an unjust way, we're out of touch with reality. So our concepts of God matter. But God is now thought of as a being outside a clockwork universe that you can either believe in, theism, or disbelieve, atheism. Could you imagine how bizarre it would be if you're walking into a room and you hear two people debating whether or not Uncle Sam is real, or whether or not Uncle Sam exists? Your first thought was, they don't get it. Uncle Sam is a personification of the government. Of course the government's real, but of course it's not literal. And so you got this debate, thousands or maybe millions of people that are debating whether or not God exists, or whether or not God is real, when the one real God, namely reality, personified or not, we've been out of right relationship to. So our views of God seriously matter. If all the people in your life who use God talk use it in a way of a supernatural being who is on the side of this group of people and condemning this group of people, then an atheist is simply somebody who says, I don't believe in that being. But most atheists and most secular people that I know of that are really into the science, they don't see it as billiard balls. They see this emergentist perspective. We have Michael Shermer is a friend of mine, the head of Skeptic Magazine. Right. Connie's known Richard Dawkins for decades. I mean, these are people who don't have a mechanistic worldview. They're emergentists. That is, they see it's not either determined, God preordained it and put it all together, or chance. It's creative. We have a creative reality, a creative cosmos, an emergence. That greater complexity keeps emerging out of lesser complexity. So I just feel a little awkward because I don't want to be dissing people saying that they believe this and how could they be so dumb and stupid, because that's really not what they believe anyway. It's reality, it's holy, it's sacred, it's whatever, but they don't attribute some supernatural intelligence to the one that created it. They see the whole thing as divine. I mean, some of them wouldn't use the word divine, but they see the whole thing as worthy of our deepest respect and honor and commitment. And so, frankly, this isn't necessarily a direction I'm that interested in, because we don't have time to convert each other over the issues of theology or metaphysics. We need to redesign our economic systems globally, which is going to take a level of cooperation across ethnic, religious, political differences in the service of a healthy future. Otherwise, we are literally condemning our children and grandchildren to hell and high water. So my focus lately, the last 2.5 years, have been really big on climate change. I'm tending these days to focus a lot less on theology and metaphysics and a lot more on, okay, we don't agree on that? No problem. Let's set that aside. What can we agree on so that we can work together to ensure a healthy future? That's sort of the bottom line for me these days.
All right, so let's compare these gentlemen. Steve believes in an anthropocentric God. Michael Dowd is into the personification. Steve is into the literal translation. Michael Dowd is into the metaphorical. Steve's ideas are pre-rational. Michael Dowd's translation is trans-rational. Steve is trying to sell pre-rational ideas as if they're trans-rational, and Michael Dowd is trying to sell trans-rational ideas to the pre-rational. Steve is an idealist, dualist when it comes to metaphysics, and Michael Dowd is an emergentist, realist. Steve believes in perfection and transcendence and puts his stake in otherworldly ideas of telos, and Michael Dowd believes in better and this-worldly progress. Steve McIntosh is advocating for his belief system, and Michael Dowd is interested in evidence and poetry. Steve backs up his ideas based on his own personal experience, and Michael Dowd is interested in peer review and skepticism. Over here you have unfounded claims. Over here you have integrity. Over here you have a human-centric perspective. Over here you have a world-centric, cosmocentric perspective. Over here you have literal theology masquerading as integral. Over here you have an example of a demonstration of trans-rational distinctions and skillfulness. This is what it's supposed to look like. This is how to do it. This is how not to do it. And that's the issue I take. These are the distinctions that I think are important. That's what I think it means to have an integral perspective. That's what it means to integrate diversity with discernment. And that's what it means to have a spiritual worldview and practice that resonates with science and rationality.
I, Kermit the Frog, will make the momentous leap to second tier. Steady yourselves. 1, 2, 3. Oh my goodness, it worked! Oh no, I seem to have regressed. Good grief. I guess it was too magical. Well,
And from the Upanishad, then he realized, I indeed am this creation, for I have poured it forth from myself. In that way, he became this creation, and verily, he who knows this becomes in this creation a creator. When you know this, then you've identified with the creative principle yourself, which is the God power in the world, which means in you. It's beautiful. I see that I am this creation, says the God. Or when you see that God says he is the creation and then you are a creature, well, the God is within you and the man you're talking to also. And so there's that realization, two aspects of the one divinity.
Accord again, harmony again.
Wonderful thing. Now, according to the normal way of thinking about the Christian religion, we cannot identify with Jesus. We have to imitate Jesus, but to say, I am God, as Jesus said, is for us blasphemy. However, in the Thomas Gospel, Jesus says, he who drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I shall be he. Wow, that's Buddhism. We are all manifestations of Buddha consciousness, only don't know it. And the Buddha, the word means the one who waked up, bod, to wake, woke up to the fact that he was Buddha consciousness. And we are all to do that. To wake up to our Jesus within us. This is blasphemy in the normal way of thinking in Christianity, but it's the very essence of Gnosticism and of the Thomas Gospel. In India, this wonderful Anjali, this greeting, you know what that means? That's the greeting of prayer, isn't it? That's what we use for prayer. They greet you with that. That's greeting the God that's in you as you come in. These people are aware of the divine presence. When you enter an Indian home as a guest, you are a visiting deity and you feel it by God the way they treat you. It's something in the way of a hospitality that you don't get where you have simply one person and another person. It's a recognition. So I look at you now in that sense, and the radiance of the presence of the divine is known to me through you.
Through me?
You, sure.
A journalist?
Jesus also says in this text, he who drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I shall be he. He's talking from the point of view of that being of beings, which we call the Christ, who is the being of all of us. And anyone who lives in relation to that is as Christ.
So that's what you mean when you say, I am radiating God to you.
You are, yes.
And you to me.
And I'm speaking this seriously. So you are the vehicle. You are, as it were, radiant of the Spirit. Why not recognize it?
Like even me now, this is God speaking to you to let you know what's up. Are you going to hear this message? God from a limited perspective, but God nonetheless putting in hard time to deliver you this message.
Now, if you're clinging to your ego and its little world and hanging on, and the deity wants to open you, the wrathful aspect comes. It seems to you terrible. But if you are open, and open enough, then that same deity would be experienced as bliss.
Think about Martin Buber, I and thou. This idea of God in first, second, and third person, God in all four quadrants, is a way of getting us to think about how the whole world around us is sacred and how to see life as a sacred process that we participate in, and to see all the different aspects and appreciate them. How I'm sacred, how I can be a manifestation of the absolute in a relative context. And so can everyone else. How we're all a part of the body of Christ, if you will. And in that way, I feel like taking God literally and worshiping God as your second person, not seeing God in your brother, your sister, your daughter, your son, your mother, your father, your friend, your dog, your cat, the food you eat, the environment. Any of these things is neglecting God. It's worshiping a figment of your imagination, while in a real sense, you're not really giving the credit where it's due. When you have a good day, it's not because God blessed you, it's because people around you may have been nice to you. So this also leads to this other problem of if heaven or nirvana is this psychological position where you see yourself as one with all that's arising, unity, atonement, or at-one-ment, and hell or samsara is being lost in separateness, then to see the afterlife as heaven is to miss heaven of right now. So not only are we missing the second person, the actual second person, are you giving credit where credit is due? Are you experiencing oneness, unity, heaven, nirvana? Or are you waiting for some time after you're dead to try to experience it? If that's what you're doing, I'm sorry, man, you're missing it. This is it. Okay, so just to sum up and recap, Steve believes in a pre-rational interpretation of mythology. He believes in a literal God and has admittedly unfounded woo-woo belief system. Almost enough said. There's nothing transrational about that. There's also a problem with integrity because he's acting like he knows this stuff from the beginning and trying to sell his belief system as if that's what integral evolutionary spirituality is. But when he's called on it, he admits that it's not. And this belief is problematic because it has us believing in otherworldly things, bypassing real-world stuff that we should be appreciating and not taking for granted. It's also offensive because it's not taking into account the tons of other people out there who are suffering in their experience and how they might feel about this kind of a belief system. It's also dangerous because he's advocating for bad methodology, bad integration. His epistemology is not really integral. He's looking in the wrong quadrant for data, and his justification for validating his worldview would also validate any other worldview. So, again, bad integration, far-sighted mishmashing, false attempts at consensus, green, pluralistic, postmodern, pseudoscientific, bad theology masquerading as integral evolutionary spirituality.
But how does one worship a metaphor, love a metaphor, die for a metaphor?
Well, that's what people are doing all over the place. That's what people are doing all over the place. Dying for metaphors.
What does that do to faith?
Well, it's a tough one about faith.
You are a man of faith.
I don't have to have faith. I have experience.
What kind of experience?
I had a very amusing experience, which it might be well worth telling. I was in the New York Athletic Club swimming pool, and I was introduced to a priest. This is Father so-and-so. This is Joseph Campbell. And he said, "Mr. Campbell, are you a priest?" I said, "No, Father." He said, "Are you a Catholic?" I said, "I was, Father." He said, and now he had the sense to ask it this way, "Do you believe in a personal God?" I said, "No, Father." And he said, "Well, I suppose there is no way to prove by logic the existence of a personal God." And I said, "If there were, Father, what would be the value of faith?" "Well, Mr. Campbell, it's nice to have met you," and he was off. I really felt I'd done a jiu-jitsu trick there. "Do you believe in a personal God?" Why do you have to say that? Why can't it be impersonal? That would be the transcendent mystery that you can also personify.
The presence of the infinite.
Thanks for watching. You can check out the full-length video right here, and here's the next part if you're interested as well.